Have you ever noticed how loud the world has become? Not just in sound, but in opinions, in arguments, in the endless rush to be heard. Sometimes it feels like everyone's talking, but no one's really listening. And in the middle of that noise, it's easy to forget that silence. Real, intentional silence can be one of the strongest, wisest things we offer the world and ourselves. Especially as we get older, we begin to realize that not every fight is worth fighting. Not every comment needs a comeback, and not every misunderstanding deserves our energy. There's a quiet kind of wisdom that comes with age, one that younger people often overlook. The ability to pause, breathe, and say nothing at all. Today, I want to talk to you about something that might sound simple, but has the power to bring more peace, dignity, and strength into your life than you may have imagined. We're going to explore the 9 situations in life where remaining silent is not just a good idea, it's the best thing you can do for your mental clarity, your emotional balance, and your self-respect. Let's start with the first one, and it's something we've all experienced, probably more times than we'd like, being criticized unfairly. There's something particularly frustrating about being misunderstood or blamed for something you didn't do. You know you tried your best. You know your intentions were good. And yet, someone else, maybe a family member, maybe a colleague, maybe even a stranger, throws their judgment at you like it's truth carved in stone. Your instinct might be to defend yourself right away, to explain, to correct, maybe even to raise your voice. But here's the hard truth. Reacting quickly to unfair criticism often makes things worse, not better. Now imagine instead, you take a breath. You listen. You let them talk. And you don't say a word, not out of weakness, but out of strength. Because you know who you are. You know the kind of person you've spent a lifetime becoming. And you don't need to prove that to anyone. That's the essence of timeless wisdom, an ancient philosophy that teaches us to master our emotions, focus on what we can control, and let go of what we cannot. One teaching reminds us, if someone does wrong, it's their issue, not yours. You don't have to join them in that wrong. Silence in the face of unfair criticism doesn't mean surrender. It means you are choosing dignity over drama. You're choosing peace over proving a point. There was a time in my own life, perhaps like you, when someone close to me misunderstood something I said. They twisted it, added their assumptions, and suddenly I was painted as someone I was not. Everything in me wanted to jump up and defend myself. But something inside whispered, "Let them talk. Just be still." And so I waited. I stayed silent. In time, the truth came out, without me having to say a thing. That's the power of composed silence. Now let's talk about a different kind of moment. One that doesn't always look harmful at first, but can quietly erode your self-worth over time. When someone is boasting, you know the situation. Maybe it's at a family gathering. A cousin who never stops talking about how successful their children are. Or an old friend who drops little hints about their new car, their new house, their vacation plans, just loud enough for you to hear. It's tempting, isn't it? To jump in, to share your own wins, to match their energy with a little bragging of your own. After all, you've lived a life full of wisdom, challenges, and accomplishments. Why not remind people of that? But here's the secret. You don't need to. When someone is loudly praising themselves, what they're really showing is insecurity, not strength. They need attention to feel valuable. But you've already earned your value. You've raised families, built careers, endured hardships, and grown through them. Your worth is not something you need to announce. It radiates in your presence, your patience, and your silence. When you respond to boasting with quiet grace, you're making a powerful statement that you're not in competition, that your joy doesn't depend on topping someone else's story, and most importantly, that your self-respect isn't measured by external applause. People may not say it out loud, but they notice. They see the difference. And often, they admire it more than they'll ever admit. There's an old saying, let your success make the noise. I'd go one step further. Let your character speak louder than any story you could tell. Now, we've talked about criticism and we've talked about boasting. But let's face it, there's another situation that tests even the calmest hearts. And that's anger. Anger is a fire. It starts small, often with something trivial, a rude comment, a careless mistake, someone cutting you off in traffic. But if you don't catch it quickly, it grows. And before you know it, that fire is burning bridges, hurting relationships, and most of all, disturbing your own peace. We all feel anger. That's human. But reacting in anger, that's a choice. And it's a choice that often leads to regret. How many times have you said something in the heat of the moment only to wish you could take it back? I know I have. Now imagine instead, something upsets you and you feel that anger rising. But this time, you don't speak. You pause. You breathe. You let the emotion settle before you respond. Maybe you say nothing at all. Just that small act, choosing silence over reaction, can save relationships, preserve your energy, and keep your integrity intact. One of the wisest things ever said was this: if someone provokes you, remember, it's your own mind giving them the power. Think about that. Your mind, your choice, your silence. And sometimes, silence isn't just a way to avoid harm, it's a place of healing. A space where your thoughts can settle. A sacred moment where you give yourself room to feel, to process, and to choose your next step with wisdom instead of impulse. I remember a friend of mine who once said, "I used to argue every time my son snapped at me. Until one day I stopped. I just looked at him, stayed silent, and walked away." He came to me later and apologized, for the first time in years. That's what silence can do. It creates space for reflection, for accountability, and for growth. So if you've ever found yourself in those moments, when words are sharp, when tempers flare, when someone pushes your buttons, try this. Say nothing. Not because you're weak, but because you're wise enough to know that silence can speak louder than shouting ever will. Let that stillness become your strength. Let it guard your peace. And let it remind you that at this stage of life, you don't need to win every argument. You just need to protect your spirit. Now that we've reflected on the power of staying silent in the face of criticism, boasting, and anger, let's keep going. Because there are still more moments in life where silence isn't just helpful, it's transformative. Sometimes the hardest silence is the one we have to hold when people are talking about us, especially when what they're saying simply isn't true. You may have experienced this before. A neighbor who misinterprets something and starts whispering. A family member who twists a private moment into gossip. And the more you hear the rumors, the more tempting it becomes to jump in and defend yourself. You might want to call everyone involved, explain your side, set the record straight. After all, you know the truth. But here's something I've learned, and maybe you have too. When you explain yourself to people who are committed to misunderstanding you, you end up exhausted and frustrated, and nothing really changes. There's something deeply powerful about choosing silence when faced with false rumors. Not the kind of silence that hides, but the kind that stands firm. The kind that says, "I know who I am. I don't need to correct every whisper to protect my peace." Think of someone like Galileo. In his time, he faced fierce opposition, even house arrest, simply for believing the earth revolved around the sun. But he didn't fight back with anger or endless explanations. He stood by the truth, calmly and patiently. He knew that time would reveal what needed to be seen, and it did. When people gossip, when they throw around lies or half-truths, let your life speak for itself. Let your kindness, your consistency, and your quiet confidence be the evidence that no rumor can destroy. People may talk today, but they remember integrity for a lifetime. Now, there's another silence, one that's not about protecting your reputation, but about healing your heart. I'm talking about the silence after loss. Whether you've lost a partner, a dear friend, a sibling, or simply a part of your life that once meant the world to you, there's a kind of quiet that follows, a stillness that feels heavy. Sometimes people rush to fill that silence with distractions, with noise, with anything that keeps them from feeling the ache. But the truth is, that quiet can be sacred. There's a passage by C.S. Lewis after the death of his wife that has always stayed with me. He said, "The pain I feel now is the happiness I had before. That's the deal." And in those few words, you can hear the essence of enduring wisdom, acknowledging pain without running from it, sitting in silence not because you're broken, but because you're becoming. When you're grieving, it's okay to sit alone and just breathe. It's okay to cry in silence. You don't owe anyone cheerful conversation. You don't have to explain your sadness. That silence, raw, real, and honest, is a part of healing. Sometimes the most beautiful growth happens not when we're speaking, but when we're listening, to ourselves, to our memories, to the love that still lingers after someone is gone. You may remember those moments in your own life, sitting by the window with a cup of tea, walking alone down a quiet path, lying awake in the dark. Those were not wasted moments. They were sacred pauses in a life that has carried both love and loss. And those silences, they were helping you become whole again. Now, let's talk about a silence that asks something more of us, not just to be still, but to be gracious. You've likely met someone who speaks with certainty, but very little understanding. They argue with passion, but lack clarity. They mistake their opinion for truth. It's easy to feel frustrated when you come across this kind of ignorance. You want to correct them, educate them, show them a better way. But ask yourself this: will they actually hear you? Or are they just waiting for their next chance to talk? When you meet ignorance, especially loud ignorance, the best response is often quiet patience. That's not to say we should tolerate injustice or accept harmful ideas. But there's a big difference between wasting your breath in an argument and choosing to lead by example. Think of Galileo again, or even Mahatma Gandhi. They didn't spend their lives yelling over others. They chose silence that spoke louder than words. They embodied the values they believed in, and eventually the world listened. You don't need to correct every person who speaks out of turn. You don't need to win every debate. Sometimes, the most transformative thing you can do is to stand tall, say nothing, and let the truth catch up. And finally, let's talk about something that all of us, at some point, have faced. Rumors that don't just come from strangers, but from people we thought we could trust. Maybe even family. You hear something through the grapevine, a comment that doesn't sound right, a version of a story you were never asked to explain. It hurts. And it's even worse when it comes from someone you once confided in. Again, your first instinct might be to confront, to demand answers, to correct the record. But take a breath and remember this: people reveal themselves not only in how they speak, but in what they choose to believe without asking you. Silence in these moments isn't giving up. It's giving space. Space for others to reflect. Space for yourself to step back and decide what's really worth your time and energy. Let your consistency do the talking. Let your actions over time speak more clearly than any quick defense ever could. There is a reason the strongest trees grow in quiet forests, not where the wind howls, but where roots run deep. And sometimes silence isn't just the absence of words. It's a statement, a message, a mirror held up to those who speak carelessly, showing them that you don't need to match their volume to hold your value. Your presence, your grace, your calm, that's where your strength lives now. You've spent decades learning what matters. Now is the time to protect it. There's a kind of silence that demands more strength than most people ever realize. It's the kind of silence you hold when you're standing face to face with injustice. You've seen it. Maybe you've lived it. A decision that wasn't fair, a hurtful comment based on someone else's bias. A moment where you were overlooked, mistreated, or spoken down to, not because of who you are, but because someone else couldn't see past their own limitations. It's easy to believe that justice always demands a raised voice, that you must protest, argue, or retaliate to prove that you matter. But there is a deeper kind of response, one that doesn't feed the fire, but redirects it. It's the silence of someone who refuses to become like the very thing that wronged them. A wise saying goes, "The best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injustice." In other words, don't let the wrong done to you change who you are. Let your silence be rooted not in fear, but in principle. Think about Nelson Mandela. After 27 years in prison, he didn't return to the world angry or bitter. He didn't use his voice to divide. He used his quiet strength to unite. That kind of silence is not weakness. It's clarity. It's power. It's the strength to say, "I will not let your behavior shape my character." When someone treats you unfairly, your silence can become a boundary, a signal that you will not engage in cruelty, but you will rise above it. Not with ego, but with self-respect. Not with noise, but with undeniable grace. And finally, perhaps the most personal silence of all, the one we choose when we're insulted. Insults have a way of finding their way in, even when we try to brush them off. A sharp word, a mocking comment, a passive-aggressive jab. It's surprising how quickly those things can linger in our minds. But what if, instead of responding with hurt, with sarcasm, or with defensiveness, you simply chose to say, "Nothing"? It's not easy, but it is freeing. A wise teacher once said, "If someone succeeds in provoking you, realize that your mind is complicit in the provocation." That means we have the power to choose what we allow to disturb us. And sometimes, the greatest comeback is no comeback at all. Imagine someone throws an insult your way, expecting you to react. But instead of rising to the bait, you look at them calmly, maybe even with a small smile, and carry on. You don't let it in. You don't carry it with you. You simply let it fall to the ground like an empty shell. That's not being passive. That's being free. Think of Gandhi. He faced insults daily, verbal attacks, ridicule, even violence. But he remained still. He believed in peace, and he knew that dignity didn't live in revenge. It lived in restraint. That same quiet power is available to you. When you walk through life with the strength to remain silent in moments that call for noise, people notice. They may not say it, but they feel it. You become a calming presence, a source of wisdom, a reminder that not everything needs to be met with more sound. And what's more, you feel it in yourself. Your heart beats slower. Your mind becomes clearer. Your days carry more peace. You don't spend your energy on fights that don't matter. You don't lose sleep over things you can't control. You become centered, rooted, and resilient. Because silence, when chosen with intention, is not emptiness. It's discipline. It's depth. It's presence. So now, as you go about your days, talking with your children, walking through the neighborhood, meeting with old friends, take these 9 moments of silence with you. Remember them not as rules, but as wisdom. Not as restrictions, but as tools for inner peace. You've earned the right to choose peace over pride. You've earned the right to let the noise pass you by. And you've earned the right to walk in quiet confidence. Let your life speak louder than your words. Let your actions show who you are. And let your silence remind the world that there is strength in stillness, and that wisdom doesn't always shout, it often whispers. Before you go, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Has silence helped you in your own life? Have you experienced the power of saying nothing when it mattered most? Share your story in the comments. We grow stronger by learning from one another. And if you found this message meaningful, give it a like so it reaches more people who might need it. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you'd like more videos like this. calm, thoughtful conversations for a wiser, more peaceful life. Thank you for spending this time with me today. I hope it brought you a sense of clarity and perhaps a little more quiet strength. You deserve peace. You deserve dignity. And you have every right to live with both. Here's to living your best life, at any age and in the most powerful silence. I'll see you in the next video. Until then, stay well and stay grounded.